A 22-year-old, college degree, $50,000 in debt, earning $53,000 a year, paying $1,400 a month in rent in a city that's technically considered affordable, getting told by people on the internet that the problem is their spending habits. That is the pitch, that is the actual pitch that an entire institutional apparatus delivered to an entire generation with completely straight faces. Meanwhile, the median home price in the United States cracked $400,000 around 2023 and basically stayed there. Mortgage rates went above 7% and lingered. Rent in so-called secondary markets went up somewhere between 25 and 35% in 3 years. And the official economic narrative during most of this was essentially, the economy is resilient, unemployment is low, consumer sentiment is improving. Gen Z read that sentence, then looked at their bank statements, then read it again. Something is not adding up. And I think what's actually happening right now is that an entire generation is in the process of stopping pretending that it does. Collectively, simultaneously. And that has consequences most people are not tracking. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to explain how the financial conveyor belt works, why it stopped working for a specific generation, why the response to that is rational and not a personality disorder, and why this is getting weird in ways that will affect you whether you're 20 or 40 or somewhere in between. The conveyor belt. That's the one metaphor I'm going to use throughout this video. It's simple, it's accurate, it's going to do a lot of work. The system that most Western economies built after World War II operated like a conveyor belt. You step on at 18. Education carries you forward. Your degree adds velocity. Your first job continues the movement. Promotions, salary increases, a mortgage, compound interest in a retirement account, eventual equity. The belt keeps moving. You don't have to sprint. You don't have to be exceptional. You just have to stay on and not fall off. From roughly 1945 to somewhere around 2000, this belt worked imperfectly, inequitably, but it worked mechanically. People who stayed on it generally ended up in materially better positions than where they started. That wasn't luck. That was the machine functioning as designed. Gen Z stepped onto that belt somewhere between 2017 and 2022. They looked down, the belt was moving backward. Not because they imagined it, because the math changed and nobody updated the instruction manual. So let's actually do the math. The first place the conveyor belt broke was education. This is not controversial anymore, but people still don't quite understand the mechanism. So let me be precise about it. In the mid-90s, the average cost of a 4-year public university in the United States was roughly $8,000 a year in tuition. Adjusted for inflation, that's somewhere around $15,000 in today's dollars. The median starting salary for a college graduate in the mid-90s was around $27,000 a year, which adjusts to roughly $50,000 today. Now look at what actually happened. Average tuition at public universities today is closer to $22,000 a year. Many private schools are running $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year in total cost. The median starting salary for a college graduate right now is around $55,000. Do you see the problem? The cost went up dramatically faster than the income went up. The return on investment collapsed. The belt got slower while the ticket to get on it got more expensive. But here's the part nobody talks about loudly enough. The people designing and selling this system had no financial incentive to tell you the return had collapsed. Universities get paid when you enroll. The student loan industry gets paid when you borrow. Your high school counselor gets evaluated on college placement rates, not on your eventual debt-to-income ratio. The entire apparatus had aligned incentives pointing in one direction: get you on the belt. Nobody in that chain was financially harmed if the belt didn't actually take you anywhere useful. That's not a conspiracy, that's just incentives. When you understand incentives, you stop being surprised by outcomes. So, Generation Z graduates, they're carrying average student debt loads somewhere between $35,000 and $45,000, depending on the degree type. They enter a job market that is technically hiring, but functionally offering salaries that have not kept pace with the cost structure they just signed up for. And then they try to do the next thing the belt is supposed to do. They try to buy a house. This is where it gets genuinely dark. In 2019, the median home price in the United States was around $260,000. Interest rates were somewhere around 4%. On a 20% down payment, your monthly principal and interest payment was roughly $1,000. To save a 20% down payment, you needed to save $52,000. On a median household income of about $68,000, you could theoretically save 10% of your income per year. That's $6,800 a year. You'd have your down payment in about 8 years if you were disciplined and life didn't happen. Tight but mathematically possible. The belt was slow, but it was moving. Now look at 2025, early 26. The median home price is hovering around $410,000 in many markets. Mortgage rates have come down from their peak but are still sitting above 6.5% in most scenarios. A 20% down payment is now $82,000. On a salary of $60,000, saving 10% is $6,000 a year. You now need almost 14 years of perfect savings discipline with no emergencies, no job changes, no relationship disruptions, no medical expenses. Zero. And that's before you account for the fact that home prices in the markets where jobs actually exist are materially higher than the national median. In most major metro areas, you're looking at median prices between $500,000 and well over $1 million. The math in those cities is not tight. It's broken. Here's the thing that makes this specifically interesting to me from a system standpoint. It's not that houses are uniquely expensive, it's that houses are the primary asset that middle-class wealth accumulation was built around for 2 generations. The 401k matters, but for most families, home equity was the actual engine of wealth. You bought a house, it appreciated, you refinanced, you used it, your kids inherited it, the cycle continued. Remove access to that asset class for a generation, and you don't just slow down wealth building, you break the intergenerational transfer mechanism. You create a structural divergence between people who got on the belt before 2019 and people who tried to get on it after. That divergence is now visible in the data. People who owned homes going into 2020 are sitting on equity positions that would take a renter a lifetime to match through savings alone. People who are renting in 2026 are essentially paying other people's mortgages while building no equity. The system is transferring wealth from one group to another systematically every single month. And because it looks like normal market activity rather than a policy failure, most people don't frame it as a problem. They frame it as a personal one. Which brings me to the psychological layer of this. Because the math is one thing. What's happening in people's heads is a different kind of interesting. Here's what I've been observing. And this is where I think the conventional narrative gets it completely wrong. The conventional narrative about Gen Z financially is something like, they're nihilistic, they've given up, they don't believe in hard work, they spend too much on experiences and not enough on saving, they're financially irresponsible. It's a mindset problem. Let me offer a different interpretation. What if it's not nihilism? What if it's a rational updating of priors? Think about it from a behavioral economics standpoint. When a behavior reliably produces the expected reward, you continue the behavior. When the behavior stops producing the reward, the rational response is to eventually stop the behavior. You don't keep pressing a button that no longer dispenses anything. That's not pessimism. That's basic stimulus response learning. The behaviors that the conveyor belt was supposed to reward, studying hard, getting a degree, working a corporate job, saving diligently, waiting for the appropriate moment to buy a house, those behaviors are producing materially worse outcomes than they produced for the previous generation doing the same things. So when you see Gen Z collectively deprioritizing certain things, homeownership timelines, traditional career paths, corporate loyalty, even marriage and children, the question you should be asking is not what is wrong with these people. The question is, what did the system do to make these behaviors stop making sense? That reframe matters because it changes the analysis entirely. You stop looking at individuals and start looking at incentive structures. And incentive structures can be changed or navigated around. Now, here's something interesting I want you to sit with. 60% of Gen Z reports significant financial anxiety. That number has been consistent across multiple surveys over the past 2 years. But simultaneously, Gen Z invests in the stock market at a higher rate and at a younger age than any previous generation. About 40% has some form of side income. Financial literacy content for people under 25 is the fastest growing category on multiple platforms. That combination does not describe a generation that has given up. That describes a generation that has correctly identified that the old path is broken and is frantically trying to find an alternative path while being extremely stressed about whether they'll find it in time. The pretending everything is fine part is cracking not because people stopped caring, it's cracking because they cared enough to actually do the math. And I want to be precise about what done pretending actually looks like in practice, because this is where it gets economically interesting and not just emotionally interesting. If you'd like to actually understand how these systems work and what to do when they stop working, this channel is where I break that down. Subscribe. It's free, and the information is worth considerably more than free. Here's what done pretending looks like as behavior at scale. First, the job market is experiencing something that economists are still struggling to fully characterize. Turnover in the 22 to 32 age bracket has been elevated for 4 years running. The average tenure of a Gen Z worker is somewhere around 2 years. This is often framed as disloyalty or impatience, but here's what's actually happening mechanically. In most corporate salary structures, internal pay increases are capped. You get a 3 to 4% raise annually if you perform well. Inflation has been running above that for significant stretches. The only way to get a meaningful salary increase in most industries is to switch jobs. Switching jobs typically produces salary jumps of 15 to 25%. So the rational behavior, the behavior that actually rewards you financially, is to switch jobs frequently. Gen Z figured this out. They didn't figure it out because they read a manifesto. They figured it out because they ran the numbers. Or they watched someone else run the numbers and saw the result. The system created the incentive. The behavior followed. You attack the incentive, not the person. Second observation. The collapse of brand loyalty to employers has a second-order effect that I don't think corporate America has fully priced in yet. When you have no loyalty to an employer, you also have no psychological commitment to overperforming for that employer. You do the job, you do it adequately, you collect the salary, you don't build your identity around it. This has been labeled quiet quitting, which is an extremely silly name for what is actually a rational recalibration. If the company is not going to reward exceptional effort with exceptional compensation, and most companies structurally cannot because their salary bands don't allow it, then exceptional effort is a gift you're giving for free. The employee figured out the exchange rate was bad. They adjusted. Now, here's the part that becomes genuinely interesting from a money-building perspective. The conveyor belt breaking creates something that a functioning conveyor belt does not. It creates optionality arbitrage. Let me explain that. When a system works smoothly, almost everyone does the same thing. You follow the path. You don't have to think too hard because the path has been pre-optimized. The consequence is that the returns get competed away. If everyone follows the same path, the path produces average returns by definition. When the path breaks, the people who correctly identify that it's broken and find alternative routes earn dramatically above average returns because they're not competing with everyone else. They've stepped off a broken belt and started walking on their own. The opportunities that are emerging right now specifically because of this dislocation are not small. They're significant. And they're accessible. Let me walk you through a concrete scenario so this stops being abstract. Imagine two people, call them person A and person B. They're both 23, both reasonably intelligent, both starting from roughly the same financial position, some debt, a job, no meaningful assets. Person A decides to play the traditional game. They stay at their corporate job. They try to save aggressively. They put money into their 401k. They wait until they can scrape together a down payment. They are patient and disciplined, and they do everything the conventional narrative says to do. Person B looks at the numbers and decides the traditional game is negative expected value. They job hop aggressively. 3 roles in 5 years, each time negotiating a 20% increase. They build a specific, high-demand skill set rather than a broad corporate generalist resume. They put every dollar of increased income into index funds because they correctly identified that they cannot access real estate at reasonable math, and the stock market is the next best compounding vehicle. They start a side project, nothing dramatic, a small service business, maybe a content channel, maybe a consulting arrangement that eventually generates $2,000 to $3,000 a month. At 30 years old, person A has a 401k with maybe $40,000 in it, is still renting, has made minimal progress on a down payment, and is roughly where they expected to be. Person B at 30 has a brokerage account with $110,000 in it, a side income stream that covers their rent, and a salary that is 30 to 40% above what person A is earning. They also have the option, not the obligation, the option to take risks that person A cannot afford because person A has no financial cushion. Same starting point, same intelligence, completely different frameworks for which behaviors to perform and why. Person A was playing the belt. Person B was walking. Now I want to be fair here. This is a simplified scenario. Real life has variance. person B's path has risk. That person A's doesn't. The side project might not work. The job hopping might not always land right. But the point of this scenario is not to say person B definitely wins. It's to say that in a world where the belt is broken, person A's path has risk too. It's just invisible risk. The risk of doing everything right and arriving at 65 with less than you were promised, that risk is real. It's just distributed over decades, so it doesn't feel urgent. The thing about the belt is that when it's working, you don't notice it. When it breaks, you also often don't notice it for a while because the breakage is gradual and you keep assuming it'll speed back up. Okay, so I want to introduce what I'm calling the 4 levels of response to a broken system. Because Gen Z is done pretending isn't one thing. It's a spectrum. Level 1 is the passive response. You acknowledge privately that things aren't working, but you continue doing the same things because the alternative is uncertain. You stay at the job, you keep renting, you keep saying maybe next year about the house. Most people are here. It's not a character flaw. The system punishes uncertainty and rewards compliance even when compliance produces bad long-term outcomes. So most people comply. Level 2 is the reactive response. You stop doing the things that aren't working, but you don't replace them with anything coherent. You quit the corporate job without a plan. You spend aggressively on experiences instead of building assets. You embrace a kind of economic nihilism that feels like freedom, but is actually just the first stage of realizing the belt is broken before you've figured out where to walk. This is the girl dinner phase if you want to be extremely uncharitable about it. It's not a solution, but it's an honest acknowledgement of the problem. Level 3 is the reconstructive response. This is where it gets interesting. You correctly identify that the old path is broken, you do the analysis to understand why, and you deliberately build an alternative structure. You optimize for the behaviors the current economy actually rewards, rather than the behaviors the old economy rewarded. You treat your career like an asset to be leveraged rather than a commitment to be honored. You invest early and automatically because you know compound interest is the one mechanism that still works the same way it always did. You build income streams outside of employment because employment is no longer a reliable single variable bet. Level 4 is what I'd call the system level response. This is the small percentage of people who don't just navigate the broken system, but build something outside it. They understand the economy well enough to find the inefficiencies and exploit them. They build businesses that leverage the dislocations. They acquire assets at the points where the system is breaking, because that's where things are mispriced. They're not reacting to the belt being broken. They're wondering how to profit from the fact that most people are still standing on it looking confused. Most of the content on this channel is aimed at getting you from level 1 or 2 to level 3 as fast as possible. Level 4 is a separate conversation for a different video. The core insight I want you to hold on to from this framework is that the response to a broken system is not uniform, and it matters enormously which response you're executing. Here's a comedic cutaway because this is getting heavy. The classic financial advice for Gen Z from older relatives goes something like, "Have you tried just spending less? When I was your age, I just saved up and bought a house. Took us a few years." Yes. In 1986, when you bought a house in a mid-size American city for $80,000 on a combined household income of $50,000. Truly inspiring, very applicable. I'm not being glib. Those people aren't lying. They just have information that's 30 years out of date, and they don't know it's out of date because the information felt true for so long, it calcified into conventional wisdom. The problem with conventional wisdom is that it captures what was true, not what is true. Okay, let me now go a level deeper, because there's a dimension of this that I find genuinely fascinating and that most financial content completely ignores. The psychological cost of pretending is not free. This is something that economists tend to undercount because it doesn't show up in GDP. When a large group of people have to maintain a cognitive dissonance, when they have to simultaneously hold the belief that the system is fair and meritocratic and works if you try hard enough, alongside the direct lived experience that the system is producing worse outcomes than it did for their parents. That dissonance consumes real mental energy. There's a decent body of research suggesting that financial stress is uniquely corrosive compared to other forms of stress. It's not just unpleasant, it degrades decision-making quality. It narrows your time horizon. It makes you less able to think about the future, which is exactly when you most need to be thinking about the future. So here's a second order effect that I think is underappreciated. The financial dislocation facing Gen Z isn't just hurting them financially, it's making it cognitively harder for them to navigate the financial decisions that would help them. The stress of being behind creates conditions that make it harder to catch up. That's a feedback loop, and feedback loops are where mild problems become severe ones. The done pretending moment is, from a psychological standpoint, actually a positive development. Not because the underlying problems go away when you acknowledge them, but because maintaining the dissonance is expensive. When you stop pretending the belt works, you free up cognitive resources to actually figure out where to walk. There's a reason debt support communities online have exploded. There's a reason loud budgeting became a trend, which is just the practice of openly telling people you're watching your money instead of pretending you're fine to save face. There's a reason financial anxiety is being discussed openly in ways it wasn't 5 years ago. The shame structure is dissolving, and the dissolution of shame around financial difficulty is a prerequisite for people to actually address it rather than perform wellness while quietly struggling. This matters at a macro level too. When shame dissolves, behavior changes faster, policy responses change. If an entire generation stops pretending homeownership is their near-term goal, the industries built around that assumption start scrambling. You're already seeing this in some real estate markets where builder behavior is starting to shift toward rentals and smaller units because the demand signals are changing. The market responds to revealed preferences. And Gen Z's revealed preferences, where they're actually putting money versus where they say they are to save face, are now becoming more legible as the pretending stops. Here's my second comedic cutaway. LinkedIn has a specific kind of post that I genuinely enjoy. It goes, "I just left my 6-figure corporate job to pursue my passion. I had nothing but a laptop and a dream. 12 months later, I'm making 7 figures. The journey wasn't easy, but I believed in myself." Comment growth if you want to know more. And then there are 4,000 comments that just say growth from adults with jobs who went to college. I don't know what that person did. Neither do you. And believed in myself is not a replicable system. The economy that actually rewards people does not care about your belief system. It cares about whether your skills are scarce, whether your output compounds, and whether you understand the incentive structure you're operating in. That's it. 3 variables. None of them are vibes, okay? I want to get into the part of this analysis that I think is actually counterintuitive, because everything so far has been dark but accurate, and I promised escalating surprises. Here it is. And I want you to actually think about this instead of just nodding. The generation that is most done with the pretending might actually be better positioned for wealth building than the generations that preceded them, if they play the right game. I know. Let me explain before you close the tab. Millennials entered the workforce in the mid-2000s to early 2000s. They experienced the 2008 crash at a formative moment in their careers. Many of them were in their 20s when asset prices collapsed, when hiring froze, when the institutions they'd been told were stable revealed themselves to be deeply unstable. But here's the thing. Their response was, on the whole, to try harder at the old game, to get more credentials, to optimize their resume, to wait longer before making financial moves because everything felt risky. They lost the most important thing you can lose when building wealth. Time, specifically time in the market. The research on this is unambiguous. The single biggest variable in long-term wealth accumulation is not how much you earn, it's how early you start putting money in compounding assets. A 22-year-old who puts $500 a month into a broad index fund is going to massively outperform a 35-year-old who puts $1,000 a month into the same fund, all else being equal. The math on compound interest is not subtle, it is aggressive, and it rewards earliness more than it rewards amount. Gen Z, because the old paths are obviously broken, is being forced earlier into the conversation about alternative asset building. The same financial anxiety that is making them miserable is also driving them to engage with investing, side income, and financial literacy at ages when millennials were still thinking their salary would eventually solve everything. The average age at which Gen Z opens a brokerage account is 21. For millennials, it was around 28. That 7-year difference over a 40-year time horizon with consistent investment produces an outcome difference that is not incremental. It's transformational. There's a bizarre irony in this. The generation that is most financially stressed is also the generation that is engaging with financial systems earliest. And if they can hold that engagement, if they can maintain the investing behavior through the stress, which is genuinely hard, the compounding math is on their side in a way it wasn't for the generation before them. The broken belt doesn't automatically produce good outcomes, but it is producing as a side effect a generation of people who understand earlier that the belt is broken and therefore start building alternative systems earlier. The people who respond to a broken conveyor belt by immediately figuring out how to walk independently are not worse off than the people who rode a working belt. In many scenarios, they're better off because they developed the capability that the belt was providing for free, and now they have both the capability and the destination. But, and this is a significant, but this only works if you actually act on the insight. Recognizing the belt is broken is necessary but not sufficient. You still have to build the alternative, which is where a lot of people get stuck. They do the analysis, they correctly identify that the old path is negative expected value, and then they don't do the next thing because the next thing is uncertain and the old path at least has social validation behind it. The inertia is real. Understanding a broken system and navigating around a broken system are different skill levels. So let me give you 3 things that actually matter here, and I want to be specific because generic advice is useless. The first thing is to explicitly abandon the idea that patience applied to the old system will eventually produce the old results. It won't. This isn't pessimism, it's resource allocation. The time and energy you spend waiting for the belt to start working again is time and energy you're not spending building something that actually moves you forward. The sunk cost of believing in the old path is the most expensive thing in most people's financial lives, and nobody counts it as a cost. The second thing is to understand that in a high cost, high debt, low return on traditional path environment, income growth is your most leverageable variable, not savings rate. A person earning $60,000 can optimize their spending until they're saving 30% and they're still building wealth. A person who grows their income to $120,000 in 3 years through skill development and strategic job movement and saves the same 30% is building wealth at twice the rate. Focus on the numerator before you obsess about the denominator. Income growth in your 20s compounds in ways that savings optimization alone cannot match. The third thing is to recognize that the psychological shift of done pretending is an asset if you deploy it correctly. The energy that was going into maintaining the fiction that everything is fine can be redirected into actual financial architecture. What does that look like in practice? It looks like having a specific written plan for where your money goes every month. It looks like automating investment contributions so you're not relying on willpower. It looks like treating your career decisions as financial decisions rather than identity decisions. It looks like ruthlessly evaluating which behaviors the current economic environment actually rewards and building your time allocation around those behaviors instead of the ones your parents told you would work. The conveyor belt is broken. It was broken before you noticed it. It will probably continue to be partially broken for a while longer because the incentives maintaining its broken state are strong and the political will to fix it is inconsistent. The people who do well in this environment are the ones who looked down, saw the belt moving backwards, stepped off, and started walking. Not running, not panicking, walking deliberately in the direction they actually want to go. The generation that stops pretending everything is fine is the generation positioned to build something that doesn't depend on someone else's machine functioning correctly. That's either terrifying or liberating depending on where you're starting from. Probably both. If this channel is useful to you and you want to actually understand how money systems work rather than how they're supposed to work, subscribe. That's the logical reason to stay. I post when it's worth posting,